The Book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, chapter 1. The words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors, in which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets, and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, "Look, this is something new"? It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore, by wisdom, all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, "Look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge." Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom, and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Ecclesiastes chapter 2. I said to myself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness, and what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom, and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish? Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days their work is grief and pain. Even at night their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God, for without him who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness, but to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so the people will fear him. Whatever is has already been, and whatever will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. I also said to myself, as for humans, God tests them, so that they may see that they are like the animals. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place, all come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows if the human spirit rises upward, and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them? Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead, who had already died, are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who has never been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. And I saw that all toil and achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Again I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen, rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven, and you are on earth, so let your words be few. A dream comes when there are many cares, and many words mark the speech of a fool. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not protest to the temple messenger, "My vow was a mistake." Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. Therefore, fear God. If you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things, for one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them, And what benefit are they to the owners, except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun. Wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children there is nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain, since they toil for the wind? All their days they eat in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger. This is what I have observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift of God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. Ecclesiastes chapter 6. I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on mankind. God gives some people wealth, possessions, and honor, so that they lack nothing their hearts desire. But God does not grant them the ability to enjoy them, and strangers enjoy them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. A man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. It comes without meaning, it departs in darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. Though it never saw the sun or knew anything, it has more rest than does that man, even if he lives 1,000 years twice over, but fails to enjoy his prosperity. Do not all go to the same place? Everyone's toil is for their mouth, and yet their appetite is never satisfied. What advantage have the wise over fools? What do the poor gain by knowing how to conduct themselves before others? Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Whatever exists has already been named, and what humanity is has been known. No one can contend with someone who is stronger. The more the words, the less the meaning. And how does that profit anyone? For who knows what is good for a person in life during the few and meaningless days they pass through like a shadow? Who can tell them what will happen under the sun after they are gone? Ecclesiastes chapter 7. A good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death better than the day of birth. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, for death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. Frustration is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. It is better to heed the rebuke of a wise person than to listen to the song of fools. Like the crackling of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of fools. This too is meaningless. Extortion turns a wise person into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. The end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience is better than pride. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Do not say, "Why were the old days better than these?" For it's not wise to ask such questions. Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Wisdom is a shelter, as money is a shelter, but the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves those who have it. Consider what God has done. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider this: God has made the one as well as the other. Therefore, no one can discover anything about their future. In this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these, the righteous perishing in their righteousness and the wicked living long in their wickedness. Do not be over-righteous, neither be over-wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over-wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. Whoever fears God will avoid all extremes. Wisdom makes one wise person more powerful than 10 rulers in a city. Indeed, there is no one on earth who is righteous, no one who does what is right and never sins. Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. All this I tested by wisdom, and I said, I am determined to be wise, but this was beyond me. Whatever exists is far off and most profound. Who can discover it? So I turned my mind to understand, to investigate, and to search out wisdom and the scheme of things, and to understand the stupidity of wickedness and the madness of folly. I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap and whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. Look, says the teacher, this is what I have discovered. Adding one thing to another to discover the scheme of things, while I was still searching but not finding, I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. This only have I found: God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes. Ecclesiastes chapter 8. Who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hard appearance. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, "What are you doing?" Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a person may be weighed down by misery. Since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? As no one has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the time of their death. As no one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. Then, too, I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise in the city where they did this. This, too, is meaningless. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there's nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of the life God has given them under the sun. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the labor that is done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim they know, they cannot really comprehend it. Ecclesiastes chapter 9. So I reflected on all this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands, but no one knows whether love or hate awaits them. All share a common destiny, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who offer sacrifices and those who do not. As it is with the good, so with the sinful. As it is with those who take oaths, so with those who are afraid to take them. This is the evil in everything that happens under the sun. The same destiny overtakes all. The hearts of people, moreover, are full of evil, and there is madness in their hearts while they live, and afterwards they join the dead. Anyone who is among the living has hope. Even a live dog is better off than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. Go, eat your food with gladness, and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days. For this is your allotted life, and in your toilsome labor under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead, where you're going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong. Nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned. But time and chance happen to them all. Moreover, no one knows when their hour will come. As fish are caught in a cruel net, or birds are taken in a snare, so people are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. I also saw under the sun this example of wisdom that greatly impressed me. There was once a small city with only a few people in it, and a powerful king came against it, surrounded it, and built huge siege works against it. Now there lived in that city a man, poor but wise, and he saved the city by his wisdom. But nobody remembered that poor man. So I said, wisdom is better than strength. But the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are no longer heeded. The quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Ecclesiastes chapter 10. As dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. Even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. If a ruler's anger rises against you, Do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offences to rest. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, the sort of error that arises from a ruler. Fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy the low ones. I have seen slaves on horseback, while princes go on foot like slaves. Whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. If the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill will bring success. If a snake bites before it is charmed, the charmer receives no fee. Words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, but fools are consumed by their own lips. At the beginning their words are folly, at the end they are wicked madness, and fools multiply words. No one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone else what will happen after them? The toil of fools wearies them. They do not know the way to town. Woe to the land whose king was a servant and whose princes feast in the morning. Blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth and whose princes eat at a proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Through laziness the rafters sag. Because of idle hands the house leaks. A feast is made for laughter, wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. Do not revile the king even in your thoughts, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird in the sky may carry your words, and a bird on the wing may report what you say. Ecclesiastes chapter 11. Ship your grain across the sea. After many days you may receive a return. Invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. If clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there it will lie. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. Sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let your hands not be idle. For you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. Light is sweet, and it pleases the eyes to see the sun. However many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. But let them remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. Everything to come is meaningless. You who are young, be happy while you are young, and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart, and whatever your eyes see. But know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. So then, banish anxiety from your heart, and cast off the troubles of your body, for youth and vigor are meaningless. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain, when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those looking through the windows grow dim, when the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades, when people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint, when people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags itself along and desire no longer is stirred. Then people go to their eternal home, and mourners go about the streets. Remember him before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. Not only was the teacher wise, but also he imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. The words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil.
It's the story of how God was seeking a bride for his son. Each book is different from every other book. I'm trying to give you the keys for you to unlock it for yourself. Well, I'd be interested to ask you, would you put your hand up if Ezekiel is your favorite book in the Old Testament? You're an average crowd. Actually, whenever I'm asked what is your favorite book in the Bible, I always say the last one I've studied. It really is. I study a new one, and then that becomes my favorite, and I think that's the best of all. And then I study another, and that becomes the best of all. It's the only book you'll ever read for a whole lifetime and still find you're discovering totally new things that you never saw before. Never get bored with the Bible. But Ezekiel, I would think, is probably the most neglected part of the Old Testament. And I'm going to spend more time on it than I have with the other books because it is so unfamiliar to people and so difficult. The first half of Ezekiel is almost unrelieved doom and gloom and quite depressing reading. That's the first 24 chapters. So many people get no further and give up and move to another book in the Bible. It's long, it's quite repetitive. We need to remember that it's 20 years preaching squeezed into one book, so that people didn't have to read it all at once or listen to it all at once. It was spread over 20 years in 3 lots, 3 concentrated doses with long gaps in between. Much of it is not relevant to our situation. It's another world, it's another circumstance, and we're just not familiar with it. There is also language that at times is crude and even offensive to modern ears. I won't give you examples. And above all, Ezekiel shows a side of God's character that we don't really like to think about. And yet it's important for us to know God as he really is. But there is a severity here in God's character, which reminds me of one statement Paul made in his letter to the Romans in the 11th chapter. Behold then the goodness and the severity of God. Now people love to hear about the goodness. They don't like to hear about the severity. And it's interesting if you listen to typical radio or television religion, it is usually all about God's goodness. And there is very, very little about his severity. So people get a one-sided view of God. And if you only looked at Ezekiel, you would also get a one-sided view, but from the other side. Somebody sent me a postcard once after I'd preached on Ezekiel, and the postcard was a picture of a silver mine in Latin America, which they'd just been visiting. And they said, you know, Ezekiel's a bit like a silver mine. There's silver in there, but you really have to dig hard for it and look for it. But when you find it, it's all worth it, which is not a bad challenge when we open this book. Now, the book of Ezekiel challenges us to ask two questions and to answer them. Why do you read your Bible? And secondly, how do you read it? And those two questions are related, because the reason why you read your Bible will actually determine how you read it. Your method will come from your motive. And there are many different ways of reading the Bible. One is what I call the medicinal use of the Bible. Do you know what the medicinal use is? 10 verses a day keeps the devil away. You know the kind of thing? And you take your daily dose of medicine and you do your bit. It's very rare that if you only read the Bible in paragraphs that you get the message of the Bible. That's why I'm encouraging you to read the Bible a book at a time. I mean, which of you would read an Agatha Christie a paragraph at a time? I mean, by the time you got to the end of it, you'd have forgotten the beginning of it. The whole plot would be lost. And people really don't get the message of the Bible reading their little daily dose. You really need to read it a book at a time, as well as looking at smaller portions. On the whole, then, there are three approaches, say, to a book like Ezekiel. There is what I call the verse approach, when people are looking for a word for themselves. I'm tempted to call it the horoscope method of Bible reading. Do you know what I mean? You read it through until a verse fits your situation, and you've got your horoscope for the day. You know, you've got something to live by. It's not really how God meant the Bible to be used, but that is how many people actually use it. And of course, you have to go a long way through Ezekiel before you find a verse that leaps off the page. But that kind of, we'll call it devotional, so it's not too insulting, that kind of devotional Bible reading, trying to get a word for me for today, in a sense it's useful, but it's not the right way to read the Bible. You might get a word of comfort here and there and a word of guidance here and there, but essentially you're self-centered. You're reading the Bible for yourself. Then there are those who read the Bible for the sake of other people, especially preachers and teachers. They're looking for something they can preach on. And essentially they look not for verses, but for passages. And there are 4 such passages which leap out of the book of Ezekiel into preachers' hands, and they usually major on one of those 4. The most popular is chapter 37, dem bones, dem dry bones. The number of preachers who've preached on those bones clickety-clacking coming together. That's probably one of the most popular, but there are 3 others I noted down which I've heard frequently. Chapter 34 is a favorite chapter to preach at the induction of a new minister or pastor. I've been to so many inductions of a new pastor or minister coming to a church where Ezekiel 34 has been preached. It's about good shepherds and bad shepherds, and good shepherds going to search for the lost sheep and bad shepherds feeding themselves. And it's often used at services which are looking at pastors and the minister's job. And then there is chapter 47, but that is taken right out of context and used in an allegorical way. That's the chapter about the man finding a river and stepping into it up to his ankles, then up to his knees, and then up to his waist, and then finally swimming in it. And oh, that's been used by so many preachers. How deeply are you into the Spirit, you know? Are you swimming in the Spirit yet, or are you just paddling in the Spirit? And it's totally misused, but it's a very popular allegorical form of preaching. There's one more. That's chapter 18, which talks about the personal responsibility of each individual for his own sin. That instead of the Father's eating sour grapes and the children's teeth being set on edge and God punishing to the third and fourth generation. Ezekiel introduces this very important principle that on the day of judgment you are only responsible for you. That each man is accountable because each man is responsible. That's a favorite theme of preachers from Ezekiel. Having looked at those 4 chapters, that's about it. And preachers who read this book to try and get a sermon usually finish up with one of those 4 and leave the rest alone. I want to encourage people to read the whole of Ezekiel, not for their own sake or for the sake of getting a message for others, but for the sake of getting to know God. Because that ultimately is the main reason for reading your Bible, so that you are familiar with God, that you know what kind of a God He is, and how He responds to us, and how He feels about us, and what He will do with us. It's to get to know God. And when you read the Bible to get to know God, every part of the Bible speaks to you. If you just read it, get a message for yourself, then an odd verse here and an odd verse there will come alive for you. If you're reading it for others, a passage here and a passage there will come alive for you. If you read it to get to know God, every single part will be alive for you. Well, that's just an introduction. I always recommend people, when they're reading the Bible book by book for the first time, to use the Living Bible. It's the easiest to read. We once read this through non-stop in our church. 84 hours it'll take you. We read it aloud. We had an aggregate of 2,000 people came. We sold half a ton of Bibles. People were coming for half an hour and still there hours later. And it was because they'd never heard the flow of the story before. And they would say, well, one more book. And then at the end of that, maybe just one more. And they were addicted, they were hooked. But the first time we did that, we used the Living Bible, and it reads very well. And it is the most accurate translation of the feelings of the Bible. It's not the most accurate for the thoughts or words, but it is by far the most accurate translation for the feelings of the Bible. It's very important that you feel the Bible, that you feel God, and that you understand God's feelings. So, the Bible is the Word of God, but He didn't write it. Human beings wrote it for human beings. And therefore we need to look not just for inspiration, but for interest. And in this series, I'm trying to help you to see both. I find the human interest side of the Bible very interesting. The inspiration comes on top of that. So in these talks, I'm giving you quite a lot of the human background. These were real people in real situations with real feelings. And when you get that side of the Bible, the divine side comes through all the more effectively. That's the point for studying text in context. The context is human. It's not just the verses in front and behind. It's the human situation in which God said that. And so often we pick out the divine word out of its human context. And that leads to boring preaching and teaching, incidentally. It's the human side of Scripture that gets me. And that's what is often humorous, too. I mean, the funniest verse in the Bible is, "And lo, in the morning, behold, it was Leah." I mean, that's the first morning of Jacob's honeymoon. He wakes up, you know. And he's got the ugly sister. Now, you wouldn't laugh if it happened to you. But if it happened to your best friend, I mean, it really is funny. You see, that's the human situation. You've touched a human situation. You were laughing. It reached you, touched your feelings. But now let the divine word come through. Here's the guy who cheated everybody else, including his old dad. The Bible says, whatever a man sows, that will he reap. Now the last laughs on him. You see? And suddenly we got a serious word of the Lord. Now I think that's the way to approach the Bible. Get the human interest. And then let the divine word come in on the human interest. And that's what makes the Bible alive for people. You can't do that just taking a text or a passage. You do it by taking a book and looking at the man who wrote it and looking at who he wrote it for and what was going on and what was happening and how they felt about it. And then we get into it. So, we're now looking at a situation many years since the 10 tribes of Israel were carried off into Assyria. 100 years later, those 10 tribes had ignored the prophets Amos and Hosea, and they disappeared. But now we're looking at the 2 tribes in the south who were even worse. Would you believe it, that people who've seen 10 tribes of their nation disappear for their sins, and who then do the same thing? Can you believe it? There is something so stubborn and obstinate about human nature that we do not learn our lesson. Somebody has said history repeats itself. It has to, because no one listens. And the one thing we learn from history is that people don't learn from history. And they should have known that they would also disappear, as the 10 tribes in the north had done, if they ignored the prophets. But they ignored prophet after prophet. Those 2 little tribes in the south, together called Judah, little Benjamin and big Judah, centered on Jerusalem, they ignored Isaiah. In fact, they got harder and harder when Isaiah preached. They wouldn't listen. They said, oh, we're fed up with that man. They ignored another one called Micah. We haven't had time to look at him. Someday we will. They ignored a man called Jeremiah. Jeremiah had a hard life. And they all said, oh, there's old Jeremiah again. And his name has become a byword for depressing people. Oh, he's a Jeremiah, we say. It's tragic. They just brushed him off. And they ignored one very powerful little man called Habakkuk. And they ignored him too. And so finally the worst happened. Now, it wasn't unrelieved sin. There were 1 or 2 bright spots. There was a king called Josiah. He was only 8 when he became the king. But an amazing discovery took place when he was king. He ordered a spring clean of the temple. It was getting very neglected, very dirty and unpainted. And he said, now we'll set aside some money and we'll renovate the temple. And when they did, they found in an old cupboard the 5 books of Moses. Isn't that amazing? See, they'd gotten to the kind of worship that's all music. The Bible got left in the cupboard. You know, that's happening today. And so, yes, they had their worship and they had their music and dancing, but the law of Moses was in a dusty cupboard. And somebody found it and gave it to the king, and the king said, read that to me. And when the 5 books of Moses were read, Josiah couldn't believe it. He said, you realize we're heading for disaster. He said, we've got to clean the country up quickly. And all sorts of terrible things have been happening, particularly in the Valley of Hinnom, just outside Jerusalem. They were sacrificing babies to Moloch. And it says Josiah desecrated the Valley of Hinnom, and it became known as Gehenna. Jesus used it forever afterwards as a picture of hell. But there were these bright spots, but it didn't do the trick. And in fact, Josiah made a very big mistake. He decided to go and join in a battle at Megiddo, at the crossroads of the world, and he was killed by the Egyptian Pharaoh. And the good boy king was gone. Then we have a man called Jehoahaz. He only reigned 3 months. And he was a bad king. And finally, Pharaoh took him away to Riblah and chained him up. And he finished up in chains in Egypt after only 3 months' reign. He was followed by Jehoiakim, Kim-I-M, and he was another baddie, son of Josiah. Should have known better, but he was a baddie. He was Pharaoh's choice. Actually, Jehoahaz had been the people's choice, but Jehoiakim was just a puppet king chosen by the Egyptians to replace the one they chained up at Riblah. Nebuchadnezzar invaded. You see what's happening? The east and the west power blocks are playing off each other. And right in between is this little nation of Judah, asking for trouble. And especially now they were getting tied up in Egypt, the big power in the northeast was now Babylon, and Babylon was on the march against Egypt. So little Judah was just getting trapped between these two world powers, and that was all their own fault. God could have held those big powers off, but God wasn't doing so now. God was not with them. He wasn't Emmanuel anymore. So Nebuchadnezzar invaded and controlled the country for 3 years and then left again. And then they suffered a series of attacks from all kinds of quarters. Babylonians came again, Arameans came again, the Moabites came again, the Ammonites came again. The result was that by this time there was only a city left of the people of God. Judah had gone, Benjamin had gone. All that was left of the people of God was one city, Jerusalem. And now totally under the heel of others. Jehoiakim reigned for 3 months, and then came a very bad siege from Babylon. Should have just mentioned, yes, that the first deportation came at this time. I'll go back to that in a moment and make it a little more clear to you. But the Babylonians came and besieged Jerusalem. They had no food. It was a terrible 2.5-year time of famine and disease in this tiny little city. And when finally the city was taken, all the treasures were removed. Do you remember King Hezekiah had shown the little king of Babylon, or at least the get-well card man who came from Babylon, all the treasures, and Isaiah had said, you're going to lose everything you showed that man. Well, this is when it happened, as Isaiah had said. But furthermore, that all the top people were taken. That was a favorite trick to reduce a conquered enemy to helplessness. You remove all the top layer of society. And in the first deportation, they took 7,000 officers and soldiers of the army. They took all the craftsmen, about 1,000 of them. They took a lot of artisans, some 10,000 of them, and they left only the very poorest people. Now, this was when Daniel was taken. We'll come back to that too. This was the first deportation, and the result was we now had one city, Jerusalem, with only the very poorest people left. And that was all God had. Almost looked as if the whole purpose of God was being brought to nothing. Finally, we get to Zedekiah, the very last puppet king allowed to be independent in Jerusalem. And Zedekiah had a little bit of an army, but again there was a siege, a dreadful siege, and this was the last of all. Zedekiah and his few soldiers decided to try and escape. All the gates were besieged, so they dug a hole through the wall, pulled the stones out, and then one by one crept through at night, and then fled down the Kidron Valley towards the Dead Sea. They got as far as the plains of Jericho, and then Nebuchadnezzar's army realized what had happened, discovered the hole in the wall, chased after them, caught up with them at Jericho. And that's when they caught King Zedekiah and his sons, and in front of his eyes they killed each of his sons, so that he would see the royal line had come to an end. And then they put his eyes out. So the last thing he saw was his sons being killed. And he was taken off. And then Nebuchadnezzar ordered Jerusalem to be totally destroyed. Every building burnt, every building pulled down, the walls pulled down, and Jerusalem finished. Now, all through that time, Ezekiel was living. And that's just the historical background. He saw all that happen. Not always because he was there, but because he saw it in vision. And it's the ultimate end of Jerusalem in his day that really is the backcloth. No wonder he's a rather depressing prophet to read in the first part of his book. After that, he gets much more exciting and positive. Once Jerusalem had fallen and finished, his prophetic messages completely changed from warning of disaster to comfort and hope for the future, which is why most preachers preach from the second half of the book, because it's much more optimistic. Well, now let's look at Ezekiel's life against that kind of backcloth. And if you want to just check out all that history, make a note, the second book of Kings and chapters 22 to 25 give you all that background. This is why we need, in a sense, to read the prophets against the book of Kings and the history, and then you get the background. All right? Now that's the history. I know history is a bit boring. It was one of my worst subjects at school. I'm interested in it now. I really am, because God's working out his purpose in history. But they never told me that in school. It was just battles and kings and queens that we had to learn. I was bored stiff. Well, now, look at Ezekiel. He was a contemporary of Habakkuk's and Daniel's. And Daniel actually was one of his great heroes. You will find throughout Ezekiel that he talks of Daniel as one of the three greatest, most righteous men of history. Noah was another, and Job was another. Those were the three great heroes of Ezekiel. He's always mentioning those three: Noah, Job, and Daniel. It's three of the best men in their history. Now let's look at Ezekiel. The name Ezekiel means God strengthens. God strengthens. And that was to be very much needed. He is called 83 times in the book a new title, which incidentally Jesus adopted for himself years later: Son of Man. No other prophet is called that by God. But 83 times throughout this book, God says, Son of Man, Son of Man. And that title is only used elsewhere in the Bible of Jesus. That's rather interesting. We'll find out why as we go through the prophecy. So he's born somewhere around the year 622, 623, during the reign of that good king. The boy king came to the throne at the age of 8. And contemporary with Jeremiah. Jeremiah and Josiah were actually the exact same age. They're brought up together. And yet they never spoke to each other as far as we know. And Jeremiah seems to have ignored what we call Josiah's reform. And I think the reason for that is that Jeremiah saw through it. It was a superficial reform. It was a reform from the top. And reforms from the top don't last. You can't change people by act of parliament. And in fact, Jeremiah saw that the people hadn't really changed. Even though the king had forbidden all the pagan practices, people still wanted them. And that's why Jeremiah was pessimistic, even though he lived in a period when there was reform by parliament. There's a lesson for Christians to learn here. It's not just getting the right laws passed. Ultimately, it's what the people want to do that will be done. And you can make it illegal to trade on Sunday, but if the people want to trade on Sunday, they're going to. You see what I mean? There's got to be a change from top to bottom, or really the best reforms come from bottom to top and touch the law last. But the people change, so the law changes. It doesn't work the other way on. Anyway, he was a contemporary of Habakkuk and Daniel. So he was born. He was taken away from his home country, never to see it again, when he was what age? 25. And he was taken away in that first deportation, as was Daniel. And so these rather upper-class people were deported in that first deportation. Now he was born into a priestly family. Here we have a unique person who combines the functions of prophet and priest. Maybe that's why he's called Son of Man. You see, if you study Old Testament history, it divides into 3 sections. When they were led by prophets from Moses to Samuel, when they were led by kings, from Saul to Zedekiah, and when they were led by priests, from Zerubbabel to Annas and Caiaphas. There's a simplification of the history of Israel. They were led by prophets and it didn't work. They were led by kings and it didn't work. They were led by priests and it didn't work. What they actually needed was a man who was a prophet, a priest, and a king rolled into one. That's what they got with Jesus, you see. But Ezekiel is a bit of a foretaste of that in uniquely combining prophet and priest. Except that he could never function as a priest. Because you cannot function as a priest in the temple until you are 30 years of age. And he was deported at 25. I hope you're interested in this. It just tells us something. That's why Jesus began his ministry at 30. That's when a priest begins. See? That's why Jesus had to wait as a carpenter until God's time. Well, I'm afraid he never did get to be a priest because he was taken away from the land, from the temple, and he never offered a single sacrifice. But he became a prophet instead. But he was of the very best priestly family, of a priest called Zadok. Zadok. You know, whenever our queen or king is crowned in Westminster Abbey, they play the music, Zadok the priest. It's still there. And he was of the family of Zadok, or Zadok. And it was so very special. Now he was deported at 25 with all the cream of society. And they were allowed freedom in their own settlements. They couldn't do any damage, so they were allowed to build their own little towns. And he settled by a canal. I think I've got a picture of the canal. Ignore the top picture, I'll come to that in a moment. They settled here by one of the canals that joined the Tigris and Euphrates. There was a whole irrigation and navigation system between those two great rivers in Mesopotamia. Middle, Potamus River, Mesopotamia, middle of the rivers, between the two big rivers. And this was the river Kibar, and they were allowed to settle in a place called, you have read it, haven't you? Because it's a well-known name. They settled in a place called Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv. And the modern biggest city in Israel is named after the very little town where Ezekiel was, by the brook Kibar. So he settled in Tel Aviv with his family. Well, that's a picture of it. Come back later to the top picture. At some stage he married. As a priest, it would have to be a virgin or the widow of a priest. Priests could not marry a normal widow or a divorcee. So at some stage he married, traded and did business. But at the age of 30, when he should have started his priesthood, he was called to be a prophet. And he had the most amazing vision of the Lord, which we'll look at in a moment. And he started a ministry. He saw the Lord. Like Isaiah, he saw the Lord, but what he saw was quite different from what Isaiah saw. It was quite a weird vision. And for the next 3 years, we've covered his main ministry. From 30 to 33, he both did miracles and preached. This Son of Man, his major ministry was 30 to 33. Interesting. And then there's a long gap when he did nothing, except that one day the Lord said to him, Ezekiel, I've got bad news for you, and you mustn't weep. Your wife's going to die in the morning. Don't weep. Because at the very minute she dies, Jerusalem will fall. Now record this in your diary, Ezekiel. Record the very date when your wife dies. And it wasn't until some weeks later that a runner from Jerusalem came to Babylon, said Jerusalem fell. Finished. And he said, when? They said, on such and such a date. It was on the very day he lost his wife. And in this way, Ezekiel had to understand how God felt when Jerusalem fell. Amazing. Many years later, well, 3 years later, after his wife died, he started to prophesy again. All that time he was silent. In fact, God said, your tongue will stick to the roof of your mouth. You won't be able to talk until I release your mouth. He said, when I release your mouth and you can talk, you must prophesy. Isn't it amazing what these men went through? And for years, he couldn't talk. Then God opened his mouth and he could talk again. But he had to prophesy. So for 1 year he prophesied, and then his tongue stuck to his mouth again. And then a last prophecy. So he prophesied for 3 years, 1 year, and just for a few months. And all that's put in his book. Amazing man. When he was 50, his last prophecy came, and he died shortly afterwards. And he's buried in a tomb in Babylon, what is now Iraq. And in fact, here's a rather poor picture of his tomb. It's at Kifi, K-I-F-I, if ever you are taken to Baghdad. It's not far from there that you'll see Ezekiel's tomb at Kifi. And that's where he died. He never saw his land again. Never saw Jerusalem again. And yet, he painted a picture of a temple that is the most beautiful, wonderful temple, which has never been built, and which we're going to look at later. Well, now that's the historical and personal background of Ezekiel, and I think we'll stop there, this talk, and then in the next talk we'll look at the shape of the book and what the messages were that he communicated in those 3 very brief times of ministry.